Welcome to the paper session 2, legitimacy issues of digitalization. So the first paper is Marcos, who has been with us for a while. Thank you, Marcos, for your patience. Deliberative democracy and regulatory compliance by emerging market forms, lessons from host country governments' pursuit of legitimate authority. And you wrote it with Edmund Maleski from Duke.
Okay, so you want to go to DC? Hi.
Please, Marcos, go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, I can share some slides, right? So I will do that real quick. I'm getting a little bit better at that through my teaching, I think. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Can you see my slides? Yes?
Yeah, Marcus. We can.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so I hope you won't mind. I've changed the title, and it's been several months, right? So a little bit of change to the paper since submitted, and I just want to get some value out of it in terms of talking about what we're really thinking about most these days. So. So this paper is with a common co-author, a frequent co-author, Eddie Maleski at Duke University. So the basic, we've been working for a while on some papers in this basic space where we're particularly interested in emerging markets, places where there's rapid economic growth happening at the same time as nascent, relatively weak market institutions. Economists and business scholars in general have looked a lot at private property, at contract enforcement, maybe a bit less at regulatory institutions, we think. And we think that there's something kind of particularly interesting, also a little bit scary, that happens when you combine rapid economic growth with weak regulatory capacity. Essentially, you have a lot of danger for society and the environment. So the slide I'm showing here is just from a day ago, an explosion at a factory in India that caused some deaths. Essentially, almost every other day, you can go to the news section in Google and find really tough stories like this from the emerging world. Here's another one from China, a little bit extra scary perhaps in a world where we're thinking about vaccines and pandemics and scary things like that. And again, in both cases, problems of weak regulatory protection for society and businesses having these negative externalities. So the ILO actually reports that about 3 million people a year die for work-related reasons, and about 2/3 of that is in Asia. And again, what do we think of when we think of Asia? We think of rapid economic growth. So we think these are there's a lot of evidence that this is just a real world phenomenon that's really important. So just real quick, there's all sorts of ways to try and deal with this. And I list them here on this slide. From my perspective, the management scholars tend to focus most on the idea of self-regulation, the idea that businesses are going to figure this out themselves, whether through CSR or through global standards. Certainly from my reading, at least, the evidence of the effectiveness of this is not so strong. And most of this work focuses on the very largest of firms, leaving 95% plus of the firms in emerging markets untouched, and as a result, leaving society and the environment highly at risk. We bring in the papers that Eddie and I have been working on for a while, we bring in the idea that deliberative democracy, this theory from political science, may be useful. Deliberative democracy, put in simple terms, argues that when you give people some voice in the creation of rules, they're going to be a little bit more likely to accept the constraints that come with those rules. There's some work that sort of shows that this is relevant in authoritarian places like China, like Vietnam as well. And there's work in psychology that's actually been cited a lot more in the management literature under the under the title of procedural justice that argues, makes a very similar argument. All of that previous work tends to be about individual people, not firms. In our work, we've been kind of taking that up a level to the firm level. So yeah, this is a previous paper in the AMJ where we make this argument, and we find some cross-sectional evidence that indeed firms are complying more when they're consulted. Though we find that it's really important that government shows that it's listening to the consulting that it does, and when it isn't listening, then there can actually be kind of a backlash. We then went on and did experimental work, and I'm just flashing real quick a slide that shows our design, but where we randomly assigned firms to have the opportunity to give feedback. And in that sort of more empirically rigorous approach, we again found evidence that giving firms the opportunity to give feedback was going to change their behavior and made them also see government as a more legitimate regulator, and made them more willing to cooperate with government. That was something that we put into a political science journal. We wound up taking this work that we'd done and bringing it to policymakers in Vietnam. So this is me at what's called the Central Institute for Economic Management in Vietnam, the leading think tank. This is Eddie and me and some others from the research team with a Politburo member. Again, sort of making the pitch that, hey, we've worked with government regulators in your country and found this evidence of the need for participation. Can we make this practical? Can we apply this in a way? Can we go deeper? Now, through that outreach, we learned a good bit about what we had not done well, or what was missing in the work that we'd done. And so just two main ones that at least have been particularly meaningful for us are that our consultation was done in person. We visited over 1,000 firms directly and asked them and had this engagement with them. And that's too expensive for poor developing countries to do for every single one of the regulations that come up. Also, engagement, the quality of the engagement clearly matters, and our work so far hasn't investigated that. The cool thing, though, we think, is that digital technology, the ability to do consultation, to give firms and workers the ability to provide their feedback on their mobile phones and online, maybe it helps us address that cost issue, maybe helps us have some low-cost ways to boost the engagement as well. On the other hand, you're not in person anymore, maybe the psychological effect that we found in the past won't translate to online. So there's, we think, a lot of potential, but also reasons to be a little bit worried too. So what we've been working on a lot over the last year plus is trying to move forward with work on digital consultation, or what's called a notice and comment portal. Myanmar is a place that's even more nascent in its institutional development than is Vietnam. Vietnam started its reforms around 1990, Myanmar only a few years ago. And Myanmar is a country that's still governed by many laws that were created by the British 100 years ago. And then it had its own central planning period under the military that it's only recently emerged from. So we've had through lots and lots of on-the-ground work, we've had the good fortune of finding an ILO organization called Vision Zero Fund that it has really well-established relations with the Ministry of Labor in Myanmar, with the leading business association, which is called UMFCCI, with the leading labor union called CTUM. And FGLLID on the slide is the factory inspection department within the Ministry of Labor. So what we're working on now is moving forward with another experiment where we're going to do random assignment again, as we previously did, but we're going to try and build on what we did previously. And so what we're going to try and do is think about these issues of one, engagement. So can we, by actually giving some back and forth with the commenting firms to help them increase the quality of their comments, can we affect the degree to which this process is effective? Because, by the way, in the past, we found a lot of the comments are really low quality. And can we also, with a cross-cutting treatment, can we have a positive impact by reporting back to firms on what government thinks about their comments after having considered it amongst all the other comments? So I think I'm basically at the end of my 10 minutes. That I'll just sort of say that one of the things in the paper that we tried to do was sort of to draw some lessons on this for private regulation, which again, as I said in the beginning, the paper is something that's had a lot more attention from business scholars. But that's, yeah, we think that's not necessarily the richest space to work on going forward. One thing that we've found particularly interesting is for example, the work on private regulation finds that private regulation is most effective when host country government institutions are effective. That's some work by Short and Toffel a while back. So again, we think that maybe management just needs to be paying a lot more attention to government. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question in the Q&A saying that some global firms behave as a conglomerate. So do you think, how do you classify then the typology internal, external sources? It's in the Q&A, so you can read it.
Yes. And is this for my paper? I think I did see this up earlier. I think this might not be for my paper.
Okay, thank you.
For Neil.
Okay.
Not sure whether Neil is
for Neil. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So let's move on. I just saw it. Sorry.
Fine with if Neil
okay.
wants to jump in.
So we have time for 1 or 2 questions and we move on to the next one.
I see my old classmate Raj wrote something there. Let's see. All right. I was wondering how one should think about the incentives of the firms and the individual workers of the firms to self-report issues. So Raj is talking about. So I mentioned how we're working with both the business association in Myanmar and with the labor union, and Raj is asking the very, very relevant question of, are we going to want to kind of have some overlapping treatments where we're thinking about essentially what happens when you have kind of an interaction of receiving feedback from the workers and from management from the same firm. That's what I'm guessing, Raj, you might be thinking about especially. And I'd say that's something we've been thinking about. At this relatively early stage, we're kind of hoping we've got one of the other cool things about the digital technology part is we think we can do a whole bunch of experiments at relatively low cost once we get the portal up and running. For the first stage, we're scared of what you're talking about, Raj. We're scared that firms' behavior might be changed when you're when they also learn about the input from workers at the same time. There is a pretty contentious relationship between firms and workers in Myanmar these days. So we're still thinking that through is essentially the answer. But it's a really interesting space, and we want it to be a positive, transparent space where the two sides can hear each other. We're just a little nervous about how that works in an experimental setting. So yeah, we're still working on it. Is the shorter answer.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, so then let's move to the next one. Jack Sadek is with us and will present something very interesting about cryptocurrencies. Too legit to quit the cryptocurrency category. Please go ahead, Jack.
Hi, yes, thank you for having me. Here, I'll just share that. Does everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So thank you for having me, everyone. So the paper that I've been working on for the last year right now is regarding cryptocurrency, and I'm using category literature as a foundation. So categories are really conceptual systems that organizations and individuals use to understand what are the appropriate behaviors within that certain marketplace. And they also tell audience members what the category is really about in terms of the meanings, the value, and the identity. So in order to gain legitimacy, categories usually need to gain a collective identity. And that they achieve that through leadership, so having a strong CEO who represents the category, storytelling, where they are able to communicate the values of the category, labels, and unique organizational forms. Now, past research has really focused on the formal economy. So one example is satellite radio. So if we look at XM and Sirius Radio, when satellite radio first came out, they actually teamed up together in order to provide the audience members what satellite radio was really about. So there are really two different ways categories are formed. So one is category creation, where you have an existing category and you just add features to it. So if you think about a car and then you add luxurious features to it, then it would become a luxury car. Then you have categories that emerge. So that's something like the minivan, or let's say a smartphone. So if we look at a smartphone that's taking a telephone and combining features of, let's say, computer processing power, putting it together, and you create a new category. And each form of category formation has different challenges in terms of developing a collective identity and gaining legitimacy. So the context of my research is related to cryptocurrency, which is really, it's a digital currency that allows for peer-to-peer transaction using cryptography, and it removes the need for a central bank. So the way that cryptocurrencies achieve this is through blockchain technology. So what that does is that within a network of computers and processors, it securely maintains a record of all the transactions that were done within that network. So we all know cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin is the big one, right? And we see the massive valuation. Like this past week, it hit 15,000, and people see it as more as an investment. But behind that cryptocurrency, the value of that is by its network, right? So that we can conceptualize these cryptocurrencies as decentralized autonomous organizations. So what I'm trying to achieve with my paper is answer two research questions. One is what inhibits category members from developing a collective identity? Because within the cryptocurrency community, we see a lot of infighting amongst the members. And also, how does a category which doesn't develop a collective identity become legitimate? So in terms of methodology, right now, what I'm doing, I'm collecting a lot of news articles and press releases on some of the top cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin and XRP, and I'm basing that on their market cap evaluation. And the reason I'm picking only a couple is because right now there's over 5,000 different cryptocurrencies. So in order to make it a bit more manageable, I'm picking the ones that really show the ideological divides within the community. So Bitcoin is the first cryptocurrency was created in 2008 by an entity known as Satoshi Nakamoto. So to this day, we don't necessarily know who he, she, or they are. But what they created was a new way of transacting peer-to-peer. And what Nakamoto did was challenge the traditional view of the financial system, because what the system provided really replaces the need for having a central authority and removes that transaction cost that we usually see. So if ever, let's say you want to send money to a friend, you usually have to go from your bank, and usually they might charge a fee for that. With cryptocurrencies, that removes that central authority and makes it provides a decentralized network which approves the transaction. So Bitcoin uses what's called proof of work. So in this network, you have a bunch of miners, which are essentially computers around the world, and they compete with each other in order to approve a transaction. So and they're competing to solve a mathematical equation. And the computer that solves that equation actually first approves the transaction, and second, as a reward for approving that transaction, gets rewarded in the form of Bitcoin. However, Bitcoin has had a very tenuous history in the last 12 years since its existence. There's been numerous amounts of hacks. The most notable one was the Mt. Gox hack, where around 740,000 Bitcoin were stolen. And at the time, that was 6% of the total supply. There's sites like Silk Road that were made early on, where people were using Bitcoin to buy illicit drugs and weapons. And this past week, the US government seized around $1 billion in Bitcoins that was used on Silk Road. So this is still an ongoing thing. So, and there's always these negative news articles that always come out regarding cryptocurrency, which damage their reputation and their legitimacy as well. Now, there's now a new generation of cryptocurrencies that are coming out. So XRP is one of them, and that was created in around 2011, 2012. And they challenged the foundation of Bitcoin. So they wanted to make a system that was more energy efficient and a lot faster. And as you can see in the pictures here, an XRP transaction takes around 4 seconds versus around an hour for a Bitcoin. And in terms of energy consumption, it's not even comparable. So when people think of cryptocurrency, the first one that usually comes to mind is Bitcoin, because it has that first mover advantage, it has the name and the recognition. But there are differentiating factors amongst these different cryptocurrencies, and different ones have different use cases. So XRP is a cryptocurrency used by an organization called Ripple, which is a software company which facilitates cross-border payments. And one of their missions is to make cross-border payments more efficient, because right now in the SWIFT system that we have, it takes 3 to 5 business days for transactions to actually settle. And there's a lot of other inefficiencies where you have all these banks have to have currency, have to have other countries' currencies in their banks and so forth, which creates a lot of issues. Whereas if you use a cryptocurrency to facilitate transaction, it would make it a lot faster and more efficient. And organizations can take that capital and use it for other projects. So within the space so far, what I've seen in my preliminary results in terms of challenges to identity, first is labels. Labels are very important when a new category is emerging, because it helps people understand, and it helps once the label sticks, that's when the label and the category starts catching on. But we have a lot of issues. So for one, within the United States alone, there's a lot of confusion from government. So the IRS says that this is a currency. The SEC wants to classify it as a security, whereas the CFTC wants to classify it as a commodity. And adding to that, each state is developing their own regulation on cryptocurrency and how to tax it. And then you have different countries which have shifted. So originally, China was one of the countries which banned cryptocurrencies entirely, but now they actually are developing their own digital yuan, and they're going to be one of the first countries to have a digital form of their currency. Another issue is that there's not one single label. So people use the term cryptocurrency, digital assets, digital money, and numerous other types of names, which doesn't really help legitimate the category. They don't have a coherent story. So, and the reason for that is that, again, within the space, there's a lot of factions and they argue a lot. So I'm on Twitter and I see this on a daily basis where there's all these arguments going on about what's a legitimate cryptocurrency. And from the perspective of a Bitcoin maximalist, as they call themselves, they kind of dismiss the idea that any other cryptocurrency is legitimate, and they coin them shitcoins. Sorry for the language. that's what they call them. And whereas, let's say people in the XRP community point to Bitcoin and say, well, you're not really decentralized as you say you are, because most of the mining is happening in China. Around 66% of the transactions that are approved happen in these mining pools, which are essentially these factories with computer processors, which are approving these transactions. So within the space, they're not really clear about what this cryptocurrency is about. And it's very difficult because there's so many different use cases of these cryptocurrencies. There's also a lack of leadership. So with regards to Bitcoin, we don't, to this day, we don't know who the actual creator of Bitcoin is. And however, there are some individuals who have come out and claimed that they are Satoshi Nakamoto, although that hasn't been proven. And then you have organizations like Ripple, which are seen as the leader of XRP because that is the nascent cryptocurrency that the organization Ripple is using. And that's another area where Bitcoin and XRP supporters argue, where a Bitcoin supporter will go, well, Ripple owns most of the cryptocurrency. How can that be decentralized and so forth? So again, they're not really helping their cause in terms of legitimizing the space. And also there's no clear organizational identity. So because, as I said before, all these cryptocurrencies use different consensus protocols, each one of them can be really seen as a unique, decentralized, autonomous organization. So there isn't really a uniform organizational style that they're using. But what we're seeing is that cryptocurrency is still, despite what the literature says about how actors within a category need to develop a collective identity, we're seeing that a cryptocurrency is being adopted. A couple of weeks ago, Square, which is owned by Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, bought $50 million in Bitcoin. MoneyGram, which is a money remittance organization, they made a partnership with Ripple, and right now 10% of their transactions are between Mexico and the US is completed using the cryptocurrency XRP. And more fund managers are coming out and saying, especially with interest rates so low, as a way to diversify their portfolio, they're suggesting that people invest in cryptocurrency, whether it's 1% to 5%, in order to diversify their portfolio. And you have big financial institutions such as Fidelity coming out and making their Fidelity Digital Asset Division, TD, has Bitcoin futures, allows for Bitcoin futures trading. And the Intercontinental Exchange, which operates the New York Stock Exchange, actually came out with their own Bitcoin futures exchange. So we are seeing the adoption. However, one of the issues is the lack of clear regulation. So like I said before, the US hasn't been very clear. And because of that, a lot of companies are actually leaving the United States. So one company was Circle, which was a cryptocurrency exchange. They left, and in a meeting with the House of Representatives and Congress, the CEO said, you as Congress aren't giving me clear direction, clear regulation, so I'm going to have to move my company. And now the CEO of Ripple came out recently in the last couple of weeks and said the same thing. Because of the lack of clarity of regulation, whether XRP is a security or a cryptocurrency, they're thinking about moving to the UK, which has more crypto-friendly regulations. So what I'm trying to really achieve in this paper is try to understand how it is that a cryptocurrency, a new category with a lack of a collective identity, is really able to develop, gain legitimacy. And what I'm seeing is that because of the financial return, organizations and major institutions are slowly dipping their toe. So you have JP Morgan, which in 2017, where the CEO said, if I see anyone trading Bitcoin, they're going to be fired. Now they're actually in the process of developing their own JPM coin and start to invest in cryptocurrency as well. And in terms of implications for emerging markets, remittances is an important resource for a resource as a source of income for many of these individuals who use it for their daily lives. So, and when it comes regarding remittances, the average fee right now is around 7%. And again, transaction time takes 3 to 5 business days. So if cryptocurrency can help alleviate some of these tensions, I think that would be very beneficial. And it's interesting to me that it's still gaining legitimacy despite what we've seen in past literature. So, thank you.
Any questions? I have one. As you know, as you said, China is launching its own currency, digital currency. Apparently, it's already launched, and there is an experimental phase. Yeah. And then immediately, Christine Lagarde said the euro is going to launch also the digital currency. These things can go very fast. The digital currency is different from Bitcoin, but they copy certain things. And the idea of China mainly is to remove the supremacy of the US dollar. They have tried for many years, but they have failed. So, and actually Europeans who are a little bit sick and tired of some of the sanctions of the US, they find the digital currency as a way to not to, they won't need to go through SWIFT. So they will be able to escape SWIFT, because as long as you have to use SWIFT, that's it. This is transparent, and then the sanctions can go. So how do you see that? Are you going to look at it? Because that's what seems to be the future, the digital currencies, no? More than, because once the governments launch their own digital currencies, what will be the future of the Bitcoins of this world? Even Argentina, apparently, the usage is going because of the peso is zero value. So how do you see that going forward? So very interesting. Okay, one last thing. If this is emerging markets led, so you have China, you mentioned Argentina, I mentioned Argentina, you mentioned Mexico. Well, Europe is not emerging market yet, but anyway, so how do you see that?
Well, for one thing, and that's actually a debate that happens within the cryptocurrency supporters, saying that if these countries come out with their own digital currencies, that doesn't solve the issue, right? Because that currency is going to be used within that network. You still need something to bridge one currency to another. So that's where, and that's something that the CEO of Ripple came out and said when JP Morgan said they wanted to come up with their own digital currency, the JPM coin. Well, you're only using that within your network. It doesn't solve the issue of cross-border payments. So you still need to have a cryptocurrency that's able to facilitate that transaction in a decentralized manner. And if countries come out with their own digital currency, what's the idea of having cryptocurrencies? That they can't just print money. But if a country comes out with their own currency, what's to say that they're not going to just keep printing more units of that digital currency? Whereas within cryptocurrencies, the amount is fixed. So that's some type of control on the supply and inflation and so forth. So I think it's going to, personally, I think it's going to be a combination of the two, where you're going to have these countries have their convert, and especially now with COVID, right? Where we don't we're going more towards a cashless society, where I think we're going to see a combination where you're going to have these central bank digital currencies, so they call them CBDCs, and you're going to have cryptocurrencies, and it's going to be a merger between the two.
Yeah, at the same time, we all use US dollars for international transactions. Oil, most of the major commodities, traded commodities, are using the US dollar, and that's not the problem. We are fine, but that's the problem for other countries. So then that's why, so the idea of the Chinese CBDC is to then their currency to be used for international transactions.
Yeah. And right now, the challenge with the United States is that because there is no regulation, they're falling behind in this. And as from the United States perspective, you don't really want to be in a situation where China launches their digital currency first, because then that can remove your status as a central bank, as the world reserve currency. And what's interesting is that Bitcoin supporter, and that's another distinction within the communities. Like Bitcoin supporters are really adamant that, Bitcoin can replace the banking system as we know it today. Whereas Ripple and XRP see a more of a hybrid form, where you see countries having their own currency, but we also have cryptocurrencies for the cross-border payments. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, but okay, who is going to trust better a cryptocurrency for international transactions? China is not going to accept one bit. Well, I don't know. We are in uncharted territory. Others, they say that they want to launch it because of the tremendous power of Alipay and WeChat. So because these guys are monopolizing, is an oligopoly of online payments, no? So then, okay, so interesting. Let's see, very interesting to follow it. And also these emerging markets and US falling behind. Okay, when you are the incumbent and you have the dollar, why to bother? I mean, you already have your crypto, your Bitcoin, your everything. So why to bother? They are challenging your power. So then, yeah. That I
and
think
many and there's a lot of representatives, like there's Warren Davidson, I think he's of Ohio. He's been pushing the Token Taxonomy Act, which is trying to find regulation for crypto, unique regulation for cryptocurrency, but it's just been lagging behind. And I think COVID kind of delayed some of these things, but we'll see what's going to happen with in the next 4 years.
Yeah. We covered this a little bit in the EMI report because this is very fascinating because the world will change. So if China is able to have their own digital currency, that can be very, very disruptive. Let's see. Remains to be seen. Interesting times. Okay, any other questions for Jack? No questions in Q&A? Okay, so then it's very late for us in the East Coast, and for me that I am not a night person. So let's go on. Vivek Mukherjee, thank you. I couldn't find you, but apparently you had another name, so Mark had to rescue you from somewhere in the cloud. So then we'll close this one, this paper session 2, with Vivek's paper, Liability of Emerging Multinationals for Human Rights Violation of Peasants, a Tale of South-South Exploitation. Please, Vivek, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So is the slide visible to everybody? Yeah. Perfect. So good morning, everyone. Good evening, rather. I have taken an unconventional topic for this conference, but the reason why I was interested in it was because this conference was about emerging economies and emerging markets and emerging MNCs, multinational corporations. So my focus is on liabilities of emerging multinational corporations for human rights violation of peasants. And the specific human rights that I would be taking up for discussion is the right to land. Now, yeah, so the background, if you look at this slide, just a moment. Yeah. So the background to this is that land, of course, is, as you know, is of utmost importance to peasants and farmers. Their livelihood depends on access to land. But in a globalized world, multinational corporations are rapidly expanding their businesses in developing as well as least developed countries, resulting in a rush to acquire agricultural land. And this is more pertinent in the context of emerging and developing countries like India acquiring a lot of land in other emerging and least developed countries, including some countries in Africa, for example. Ethiopia is one such example. So the central issue that I will be focusing on is that multinational corporations are not yet recognized as subjects of international law and therefore not directly responsible for violation of international law. So the whole liability ultimately falls on states, which is not fair since MNCs enjoy a lot of power in international investment laws as compared to the responsibilities that they hold in IIL. Moreover, the international legal framework does not provide for an explicit right to land. In my paper, I focus on the issue of land grabbing that takes place by misusing investment treaties signed between developing and least developed countries. So my focus is on treaties which are signed between countries of the global south and not a treaty between a country of the global north and the global south. Right? So I have asked certain questions in the first part of my paper, which are how the right to land should be framed doctrinally, given its current absence from human rights law treaties, Does it serve an original purpose, and can it be readily incorporated into the current human rights framework without spoiling the broth? What is the nature of land acquisition clauses in international investment agreements? Can international law state responsibility be innovatively used to attribute liability to multinational corporations for their human rights violation? Whether the ISDS framework, the Investor State Dispute Resolution Framework, uh, whether it should take cognizance of grave violations of human rights, especially when the conduct of the investor is in contravention to jus cogens norms, inderogable principles of international law, which cannot be violated. When it is in violation of that, should the MNCs be liable? Will it make any difference in MNC's behavior to make them liable for jus cogens violations? Can the tool of human rights impact assessment play a role in balancing the interest of investors and host states? Also, can we make stabilization clauses, and I'll explain at a later point in my presentation what stabilization clause really is in international investment agreement, be made more reasonable and sensitive towards human rights? Or should we absolutely do away with the idea of stabilization clauses? So this is a little bit of a background to uh, to the solutions that I propose. And in fact, in this presentation, I propose 7 solutions. If you look at the screen, which might help in integrating human rights language or human rights framework into international law in general and international investment law in specific. So the first solution that I propose is applying.
Sorry, Vivek, to interrupt you. Could you please put your slides in presentation mode so we can see it bigger? Thank you very much.
Is it better? Yeah. Right. So the first solution that I propose is applying rules of interpretation from international law of treaties, the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties, to human rights norms in treaties. So this may be done by declaring multilateral human rights treaties as superior law, which trumps over bilateral investment treaties, like it was done in the case decided by Inter-American Court of Human Rights about the right to land of indigenous population in Paraguay. Another tool could be the application of the principle of systematic integration, which recommends that treaties should be interpreted taking into account any relevant rules of international law applicable in relation between the parties, and not looking at international investment treaties in silos or in separation to the other norms of international law, including human rights laws. Another tool of interpretation is the different planes doctrine. It seeks to interpret them in mutually compatible ways. So arbitral tribunals have applied this doctrine to hold that international human rights law norms and international investment law norms operate on different planes and not on the same plane. Right? So that's the first solution. The second is making corporations liable under responsibility regime of international law. So a state-centric international law does not typically consider MNCs to be subjects of international law, as I've already said. Many attempts have been made to regulate corporate behavior using soft law principles, like the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, adopted in the year 2011. These soft law interventions, I believe and I contend, are not enough. Rather, a legally binding instrument is required, as has been emphasized by the Ecuadorian proposal made in 2013. As of now, a workable solution is to apply Articles 28, 55, and 56 of the UN Charter, or Article 2 of the ICESCR, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, under which the states have a right to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. The third proposal that I make is integrating human rights clauses into investment treaties. So there are instances where introduction of human rights consideration in areas other than international investment laws, like for example, development, cooperation, and international trade, has had positive impact. So the benefit of inserting human rights into international investment agreement is that it addresses the issue of extraterritoriality, since both parties agree on the appointment of an international body to resolve dispute or to interpret a treaty. It also has the benefit of clearly defining the rights and duties of a corporation in international law and reducing the autonomy of arbitrators, so that they should be in a check, and there should be a check and balance. The fourth proposal is bolstering state rights to regulate. So as a reaction to rising discontent against economic globalization, many states have reconsidered their model BITs, bilateral investment treaties, to increase state regulatory discretion. Some have called this the third era of BITs. Now, if you look at the 2004 model BIT of the United States of America, it gives greater regulatory discretionary power to the host state. Canada and many other nations have followed suit, and some states have even sought to disengage from investment treaties regime altogether. Now, the fifth proposal that I make is distancing from ISDS, which is Investor State Dispute Resolution. Now, ISDS framework has been used to institute more than 500 cases to roll back public interest policies, including those related to land. It has not been in favor of human rights like the right to land. Now, the ISDS framework has been criticized by many for providing too broad substantive rights to investors, surpassing even the strong property rights regime of the United States, for example. But this includes right to regulatory framework that conform to the foreign investors' expectation, which ISDS tribunal have interpreted to mean that government should not change regulatory policies once a foreign investment has been established. Now, scholars argue, of course, that companies' usage of ISDS and corporations' usage of ISDS procedures to challenge social policies is leading to what we call as a regulatory chill. The sixth proposal that I make is adopting human rights impact assessment, HRIA, in international investment agreements. Now, HRIA is a more recent tool. HRIA is familiar or similar to environment impact assessment or social impact assessment, yet they differ from it since it is based on the human rights rubric, which makes it independent and indivisible and beyond the limitation of territory. Now, formal and uniform guidelines for the conduct of human rights impact assessment is needed, but in absence of such guidelines, it should be based on minimum standards laid down by human rights norms, like the ICCPR, ICSCR, or even the ILO convention, which will also bring legitimacy and credibility to the concept of HRI. The final proposal that I make is renunciation of stabilization clauses. Now, stabilization clause is a means for foreign investors to mitigate or manage the political risks associated with their project by addressing change in law in the host state. So it is to avoid any kind of change in law in the political, social, or economic domain once an investment agreement has been made. Human rights advocate claim that negative effects of stabilization clauses are exacerbated in developing countries where rapid legislative development and implementation is needed rather than obstacles to application of new laws, which is progressive. Right? So in conclusion, I believe that lawyers and even non-lawyers have to kind of rise up to the occasion and use whatever tools we have available to us, like the tools that I have proposed in the 7 proposals, to integrate human rights into investment regime, into the investment law regime that we have under the larger umbrella of international law. Thank you.
Vivek, any questions? I think this is a very important issue because, as you know, China is buying, you are saying India as well, China is buying agricultural land in many countries, including Brazil and other agricultural powerhouses. Definitely Africa is a tremendous continent that is population density is very low, so it's another target. But definitely South America, they have been buying Argentina, Brazil, and even in places where regulations are very strong. So definitely it's a very important subject, and this point of view of law is a very important one. Okay, thank you for your contribution. Any other questions?
Lourdes,
Yeah, Ravi.
I'm just wondering, what are the prospects of any of these solutions being adopted?
That's a very good question.
That's a great question. So what I have made sure in this paper is that I do not propose any radical solutions to integrate human rights into investment treaties. In fact, for example, the movement away from ISDS framework is not just from the perspective of integrating human rights into investment treaties. Already, ISDS framework has seen a lot of criticism among all kinds of scholars, including international investment law scholars, for a varied range of reasons, and not just for its unsuitability for human rights. So that it's practical in that sense. Also, states' right to regulate, as I said, in 2004 itself, the USA had already made or taken steps to ensure that states have more right to regulate rather than protecting the property interests or the economic interests of investors. That also applies to integrating human rights clauses in investment treaties. Some of this has already started taking place. This is not something new. HRIA, for example, Human Rights Impact Assessment, is a tool which was proposed recently in 2015, 2016. But already you see that in some of the investment agreements, HRIA, Human Rights Impact Assessment, has been applied. So these are proposals that I make, where small toddler steps have already been taken. But what I seek or what I propose is to take it a little further. The only radical proposal that I make is that the soft law principles that have been proposed way back in 2011 is not enough. We need hard law instruments to regulate this problem of human rights violation by multinational companies.
There is a question by Ricardo. Maybe you can read it and answer
Okay.
in the Q&A. You press Q&A and the question number 2.
Sure. I'm trying to press Q&A, but...
Okay, so I'll read it for you. In the 90s, it was proposed the multilateral investment agreement for FDI by the OECD, but failed. It was thought as a parallel international organization as the World Trade Organization. Are you thinking about a new international organization?
Well, no, that would be quite radical to propose a new international organization replacing the existing, Bretton Woods and different other kinds of organizations that we already have. What I'm proposing is to work with the kind of tools that we already have available. The WTO, the World Bank, the different other institutions who have been financing or have been supporting investment in the agriculture sector needs to be, I propose, more careful about human rights. The World Bank has already taken some steps, for example, to make their actions more green or more environment friendly. But have they taken steps to introduce HRIA, for example, Human Rights Impact Assessment? Or have these institutions really recognized the right to land as a real right? Because what I also propose in my first part of the paper is that right to land has not been recognized by international law in general as a right, since it is an economic right and it is something that is usually neglected as compared to political civil rights. The focus that we need to have on such rights is something that I have been emphasizing on. And the institutions that already exist need to kind of recognize that. And this push has to come from already existing UN organizations, for example, like the UNHCR and the UNHRC and different other organizations that work in the field of human rights, international organizations that are already existing.
Daniel is asking a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, please.
we've seen a couple of instances of what I call judicial arbitrage, whereby companies have been sued in their country of origin for human rights violations in the host country. So I think one case was Goldcorp was sued in Canadian courts for activities in Guatemala, and I think BHP Billiton was just sued in a UK court. Does this have a future, or are these just random and isolated events?
No, well, as I said, this is something that is going to only increase in the instances that have already taken place. So, for example, these cases that have come up in domestic courts is something that will only increase once you integrate human rights into international investment agreements and investment law. That is because of the fact that, as I have already mentioned, when you take these steps, what happens is that human rights as a rubric allows for extraterritoriality, especially international human rights law, right? So, which means that an international dispute can be taken up in domestic courts. And that kind of makes investors' interests or MNC's interests a little vulnerable. But I believe that this is something that is going to happen in the future more often. And therefore, what we should do is to prepare ourselves for that instead of trying to shy away from these issues. And that preparation can come from, for example, making laws in domestic countries to regulate what kind of cases can domestic courts really take up and what kind of cases courts cannot take up or does not have jurisdiction to take up. So that's something, and what kind of cases has to go to ISDS, for example, or other international forums and should not come to domestic court. So that clarification has to come in the domestic sphere. It cannot, I don't believe that there can be a multilateral treaty which binds all countries to say that this is a category of cases that cannot come up in a domestic court. It has to be on a case-to-case basis.
Thank you.
In the chat, there is a comment. The IFC meant to do environmental impact assessments in all their projects. I wonder if there is an overlap.
Well, in my paper, I have made this comparison between environment impact assessment and human rights impact assessment.
Okay,
the difference that I have highlighted is that environment impact assessment is a quite developed and matured field. Human rights impact assessment has only started now, but the advantage that human rights impact assessment has, although it is not mature and it is not a developed field, is that it has the backing of the human rights framework and the human rights rubric. So until and unless this tool develops over time in the next decade or so, what we can do is we can fall back on already existing basic norms like the ILO norms or convention or the ICCPR and ICSCR, specifically rights which are very, very important for peasants or for farmers, needs to be recognized first, and then gradually more rights can be incorporated and integrated into investment treaties.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, as Ravi was saying last night, we are all in uncharted territory. Vivek, thank you very much. I'm very glad that you could connect from, where are you located?
Hyderabad, India.
Ah, Hyderabad, yeah. Beautiful city. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the authors in this panel. Different subjects, but all very interesting. Let me just remember your names. Marcus Tosik, Jack Sadek, and you, Vivek. So regarding digitalization, and again, so these treaties, if you have digitalization, you have a digital part, also it's easier to regulate sometimes. So thank you very much. And then I was chatting with Chris, and what we were thinking, sometimes the online events, go over time. But actually, often online is a little bit more efficient because you don't get up and move to another room, or and sometimes goes faster, as it is a little bit today the case. And also we were missing one paper. So then we are thinking of, because we are about 15 minutes before time, ahead of time. So we have the closing at 11. So we are proposing to do the closing remarks right now, and then go to the roundtable sessions that Mark will explain in a minute how we are going to organize them differently to avoid the problems that some of you had. I had no problems, and Mike Penk also didn't have problems, but some of you had problems. So then any conference, and as Ravi was saying, we are all learning by doing. Any conference, and again, this one was supposed to be live in May with EMI's 10th anniversary. Then we moved it to now, November, because it was right after the EMI conference celebrating the 10th anniversary. And then we said 2 for the price of 1, so you can come to both. But then the big decision was, shall we do it online or shall we move it to next year? We had already moved the conference for 6 months. So then we decided, let's go online and let's experiment with going online. Many of you have been in conferences online. The first decision was what to use. And actually we were thinking of using Hopin, that I've used in some conferences. But then Hopin, the video quality is not very good. And finally, we decided for both the EMI conference and this one to go with Zoom, among other things, because these big universities are a little bit slow taking decisions. So then we didn't have the official approval of Cornell to use Hopin. So they say, okay, use it, but you will be completely on your own. So which was not a good thing. So we are using Zoom, and actually with the help of Mark, and that's the first person we need to thank today. I think everything is going well. We have academics joining from India, from China, from Europe, from Colombia, from different countries in the world, from Peru, and it's going very well. And we didn't need to travel, and we could get together. So that's the first thing, to say big thank you to Mark Yeager, who has been and is still with us the whole weekend, making this possible.
Really,
yeah, thank you very
sure.
much, Mark.
Yeah. Really, a lot of complex stuff, and really appreciate it. It's gone very smoothly.
Thank you. Then the second thank you, big thank yous to Kunien Chao, who was first for May. Kunien. In May, we had a whole team of PhDs because, of course, we had dinners, we had hotels, we had everything. And then we need the same team to cancel everything because everything was ready. And also hard negotiations with the hotels, because some hotels didn't want to cancel. And thank God at the end, we could cancel everything without paying extra, but yes, so that was a wonderful committee. And then you said, okay, I'll work on my own. So you have done it all. So thank you. The EMI team, Britika and Mijika, who prepared this program very well. And then also a big thank you, and that we have to say thank you to Mike, because Mike, you said, write to the Society for Advancement of Management Studies in Durham, UK, and they gave us some support. So thank you very much. And last but not least, and maybe all co-chairs can say a few words, Mike Peng from UT Dallas, Rabbi Ramamurthy from Northeastern, and Simon Fraser and Ying Lee from Vancouver, from Simon Fraser University in Canada. Chris, you want to say? And also the moderators, we have here Andrew Foley.
Yes.
We had yesterday other PhD students moderating.
Yang Liu. So I think that, the other PhD students have been tremendously helpful as well. I mean, so thank you, Andrew and Yang. That's really helpful. And thank you, Lourdes, as well. I mean, it's been wonderful to be working on this with you as part of this bigger, GSEM team. So it's been, I think that, we all could do our individual conferences, but actually to come together and do something every year, it really actually means something a lot more. So I think it's wonderful that Cornell is part of this larger group, and we really owe it to you, Lourdes, for involving us in that. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, and maybe all the co-chairs can say just a few words. Ravi, you haven't, yeah, please.
Yeah, I just want to, and I really didn't do anything for this conference. So this is the beauty of the consortium model. When it's your turn, you have no rest, but when it's not your turn, you just have all the joy and the pleasure of hearing papers and so on. And you guys have done a tremendous job, given all of the constraints and all of the, you actually had ran 2 conferences, one in May and one now. So you had to do double the work. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that, we first started this conference in Boston with the idea of rotating it every other year. And we did it with University of Miami. So they did it once. We got back a second turn, but ever since that, we've been adding more partners. So I may be retired by the time it ever comes back to Boston again, which is fine, So thank you for doing this. I think this is terrific that we are pooling our efforts. And I just wanted to say that, Lourdes, I've watched you building EMI over the last few years, and I must admit, I'm just blown away by your energy. You got a new initiative every year. You got a pitch competition and a case competition, and then now you're talking about some other ideas. So we can't compete with you. So we can only partner with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Mike Peng. Mike Peng, you are I remember all the advice when the conference was supposed to be live, and actually I followed your script exactly. So we were ready for May, but then we had to unready ourselves and then prepare this one. So thank you very much, Mike, because you really were saying now this, and we did it, but then.
Oh, but congratulations! You have gone way above and beyond what I suggested. Congratulations, Lourdes and the team, and Chris and the team. You have made the GSEM G global. Now this is a true global conference in a true sense. People not only are coming physically. I know the airlines and hotels will hate us, and restaurants will hate us, but. For us academics, I think this is now truly becoming a global enterprise, synchronous enterprise. So congratulations, we've done it. It's heartening. And Ravi, you might not know, the reason I got hold of this was University of Miami colleague Yadong and I were longtime colleagues, and once we met each other in Perth, or Western Australia, so we just chatted about this. And Yadong was inviting me to come to your conference, which is your second conference in Boston. I said I could not make it, but maybe in a year or two we can do something to. Since you guys are so busy, you probably don't want to get yourself killed every year.
Right.
So I'll try to help you out a little bit by bringing the conference to Dallas, and then of course we met Lourdes, and Lourdes wanted to bring it over to Cornell, and then of course I have known Jing and Danny for years. So I said, look, we're trying to expand, and maybe you guys want to give this a shot. So we're so thankful that they're coming on board. So and now we're hearing other universities expressing some interest. So no, this is fantastic. So congratulations. We have made it, and we'll make it better. So thank you all.
Yeah, and I should say that the people who are involved are all good friends, and it's a very pleasure to work with people like all of you. Sometimes these can get very complicated, but we have a wonderful working relationship, and all people whose friendship I treasure. So it's great to do it this way.
You are very right, Ravi. And then Ying Li and Daniel. You're in mute, Daniel. Ying, I think Daniel wants you to speak because before you were not there.
I've said enough. Jing, it's your turn.
Okay, I just we are so glad to be a part of this consortium. I think we joined this year or last year, and as Ravi said, we have known each other for years, and then it's just great pleasure to work with friends, and we're very excited to host next conference in 2 years. And Danny and I already talked today, actually, to talk about the theme and looking at the success 2 years ago at Dallas and this year's great conference. We feel we are under great pressure. We need to think ahead of time about the theme and the panels, the potential speakers to the conference. So we are very excited. We look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a possible, Peter Gameltoft from CBS also mentioned that could be interested in organizing it after SFU. So we'll see. More part of the consortium is growing. Chris?
Yeah, so nothing else. I mean, we have our next, we have the roundtable sessions, which will conclude things. And so, I suggest we move to those and discuss the papers in each of our breakout rooms. So